When we begin a conversation about jinn possession, the first thing we must do is take a step back and remind ourselves of a fundamental truth that modern minds often overlook. There is more to existence than what we can touch, see, or measure. We live in an age that worships what can be observed: science, data, evidence. And yet the Quran invites us again and again to believe in al-ghaib, the unseen. Belief in the unseen is not a rejection of reason. It is an expansion of reason. It is the recognition that human perception is limited and that reality extends far beyond the horizon of our senses. The unseen world is not a fantasy or a fairy tale. It is a parallel realm populated by creations of Allah that operate under laws we cannot fully comprehend. Among these creations are the jinn, intelligent beings endowed with free will, who existed long before Adam was created. They eat, drink, marry, have children, and just like us, they choose between good and evil. Some among them are believers, humble before Allah, while others are rebellious and follow the path of Iblis. The Quran dedicates an entire chapter, Surah Al-Jinn, to describing their existence and their acknowledgement of the truth when they heard the Quran recited. But because this reality is unseen, it's easy for arrogance to creep in. People begin to mock what they cannot see, assuming that disbelief makes them enlightened. Yet, in truth, arrogance blinds more effectively than ignorance ever could. The refusal to acknowledge the unseen is not sophistication, it is limitation. The human being, in his pursuit of mastery over the material world, often forgets that he is himself a mixture of the seen and the unseen, a body of clay and a soul of divine breath. When the Quran speaks about jinn, it's also reminding us about our own duality, that we are more than physical organisms. We are spiritual beings engaged in a constant struggle between light and darkness, faith and doubt. Now, why is this awareness so crucial to our discussion? Because disbelief in the unseen weakens spiritual vigilance. When you deny the existence of what you cannot see, you also deny the possibility of being influenced by it. You stop protecting yourself. You stop remembering Allah with the seriousness and consciousness that comes from knowing that unseen eyes may be watching, unseen whispers may be influencing, unseen forces may be testing you. The Prophet Faye taught us that every human has a carrying a companion from the jinn who whispers to him, but that remembrance of Allah is what keeps him safe. Neglecting that reality doesn't protect you from it, it only leaves you exposed. The world of the jinn operates in a domain that intersects ours but remains hidden. They inhabit places of impurity, they travel swiftly, and they observe human behavior in ways we cannot observe them. This imbalance of perception is what makes humans vulnerable if they live heedlessly. When a person's life revolves purely around material pursuits, when their connection with Allah weakens, their spiritual shield begins to crack. The jinn see this vulnerability. They see the emptiness of a heart not filled with remembrance, and some among them exploit it out of jealousy, hatred, or mere play. And so, belief in the unseen is not just theological, it's psychological. It humbles the ego. It reminds us that we are not as powerful as we think we are. It keeps our hearts alert, our tongues moist with dhikr, and our homes alive with Quran. The believer walks through life aware that unseen realities coexist with the visible, and that awareness becomes a shield, a form of spiritual intelligence that keeps him grounded and guarded. At the end of the day, acknowledging the unseen is not about fearing the jinn. It's about fearing Allah, the Lord of both men and jinn. When the heart is anchored in that awareness, fear transforms into clarity, and superstition transforms into strength. So before we ask why the jinn possess humans, we must first ask ourselves, do we even believe deeply and consciously in the world beyond our sight? For the one who forgets that unseen world will never understand the wisdom behind what happens within it. When we speak about jinn possession, it's easy to imagine it as something random, as if a person is suddenly targeted without reason or cause. But in reality, nothing in the spiritual world happens without permission or wisdom from Allah. Every spiritual vulnerability has a root, and that root is almost always connected to human negligence. Possession doesn't begin with the jinn, it begins with the human heart that forgets its guard. You see, the human soul was designed to be protected through remembrance, *d*. It is the constant remembrance of Allah that keeps a person spiritually sealed. Just as your immune system protects your body from disease, your remembrance protects your spirit from intrusion. When that remembrance weakens, the heart becomes like a house with open windows during a storm. Dust, wind, and insects find their way in, not because they are strong, but because the owner left the door unlocked. The Prophet *FDFA told us, recite *ayat al-kursi*, and Allah will appoint a guardian over you, and no shaitan will approach you until morning. He taught us to say *Bismillah* before entering our homes, before eating, before undressing, before leaving for travel, not as rituals, but as shields. Every remembrance is a wall of light, but when people stop praying, when they fill their homes with music and sin instead of Qur'an and dhikr, when arrogance replaces humility, those walls crumble. The jinn do not break into protected hearts, they enter abandoned ones. Sometimes possession occurs because of deliberate disobedience, engaging in black magic, fortune telling, or calling upon spirits for help. These acts are not only sins, they are open invitations to evil forces. Other times it is through envy, anger, or deep spiritual despair. When a person allows hatred, jealousy, or lust to dominate his soul, that emotion becomes a door, a weakness that darker forces exploit. The jinn are opportunists, they seek imbalance. They are drawn to the places where divine light has faded, much like flies are drawn to decay. But we must also understand that spiritual vulnerability does not always stem from deliberate sin. Sometimes it comes from emotional neglect when a person's heart is weighed down by pain, anxiety, or trauma. These wounds, if not healed through remembrance, can become spiritual fractures. The jinn sense that vulnerability, just as predators sense the wounded in a herd. That's why it is so essential to treat both the spiritual and the emotional self through prayer, therapy, Quran, and self-awareness. Islam never divides the human being into disconnected parts, it heals the whole. Another major cause of vulnerability is arrogance. When a person begins to feel invincible, to think that he is too intelligent, too modern, or too self-sufficient to need Allah's protection, he has already lost it. This is exactly how Iblis fell, pride that refused to bow before divine command. The same pride that makes a human dismiss dhikr or mock Ruqyah is the pride that leaves him most defenseless. Because spiritual strength isn't about power, it's about humility. The humble one who bows his head before Allah walks under a shield that no jinn can pierce. The irony is that the jinn themselves fear the people of remembrance. They cannot harm those whose hearts are alive with the Quran. When a believer recites *ayat al-kursi*, when he remembers Allah upon waking, when he keeps his prayers consistent, his light becomes unbearable for them. The Quran describes it beautifully. Indeed, my servants, you have no authority over them. *15. 42. The only ones the jinn can touch are those who willingly step outside Allah's protection. So the question isn't simply, why do jinn possess humans? The deeper question is, what have we neglected that left us open to their touch? Every moment spent heedless is an opening. Every sin unrepented is an invitation, and every remembrance forgotten is a wall removed. If you want protection, it's not found in amulets or charms. It's found in sincere remembrance, in spiritual discipline, in humility before Allah. The real cure is not in fear of the jinn, but in love of the divine. For when the heart is filled with Allah, there remains no space for anything else to enter. When we examine the phenomenon of jinn possession, it's important to recognize that it does not exist in isolation. It intersects with the human mind and heart in profound ways. Not every experience that appears as possession is purely supernatural, just as not every illness is a physical one. Some cases are deeply psychological, reflecting inner trauma, suppressed fear, or unresolved guilt. The Quran itself acknowledges the intertwining of the seen and unseen, the physical and the spiritual, showing us that human experience is never one-dimensional. Think for a moment about fear. Fear is a natural human emotion designed to protect us, but when it becomes chronic, it can distort our perception. A person gripped by constant fear may feel haunted, tormented, or watched. Similarly, unresolved anger, depression, or anxiety can create an inner turbulence that makes the soul feel unsteady. The Jinn, being aware of human emotional states, may amplify these feelings. They do not always invent fear where none exists. Rather, they exploit the fear that is already present. Trauma, whether from childhood experiences, betrayal, or loss, becomes an opening. A heart wounded by life is fertile ground for both psychological and spiritual disturbance. The interplay between ego and vulnerability is also critical. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes humility as the antidote to spiritual harm. Arrogance is not merely a social flaw, it is a spiritual weakness. It blinds a person to his dependence on Allah, making him dismiss the unseen world, mock the reminders of the Prophet, letter F, DFA, and ignore the spiritual disciplines that protect the soul. Just as Iblis fell due to arrogance, humans too expose themselves when they elevate their intellect, their strength, or their self-sufficiency above divine guidance. The Jinn are drawn to this imbalance not because they are inherently more powerful, but because the human ego creates cracks that light cannot enter. There is also a lesson in the psychology of attribution. When strange things happen, sudden anger, unexplained fatigue, or intrusive thoughts, it is tempting to immediately assign blame to external forces. The Quran encourages self-reflection first, to examine our hearts, our actions, our attachments. Sometimes what feels like possession is a mirror reflecting unresolved internal conflicts. Recognizing this does not diminish the reality of Jinn, it deepens our understanding. It teaches us that spiritual vigilance must be accompanied by emotional and psychological awareness. Healing the soul often requires both. Another dimension to consider is moral and ethical vulnerability. Sin, especially repeated sin, weakens the spirit. Envy, deceit, pride, or indulgence in forbidden pleasures gradually erodes the spiritual shield. The Jinn do not possess in a vacuum. They act where the human spirit has been compromised. This is why the Prophet letter FDFA emphasized both outward and inward purification, physical cleanliness, moral integrity, and constant remembrance. It is a holistic system designed to fortify the human being against spiritual and psychological disruption alike. Understanding the psychological dimension also empowers us. It teaches us that possession is not always about fear of the Jinn, but about awareness of ourselves. The experiences that feel external are often highlighting internal imbalance. This insight transforms fear into responsibility. It tells us that by strengthening our hearts through prayer, Quran reflection, and ethical discipline, we reduce our vulnerability. The Jinn are not omnipotent, they are limited, and they cannot penetrate a soul that is grounded in remembrance, humility, and inner harmony. So when we ask why Jinn possess humans, part of the answer lies within us. It lies in the fears we refuse to confront, the trauma we neglect to heal, the ego we inflate, and the sins we excuse. Spiritual danger is often mirrored by psychological imbalance, and the remedy, just as the Prophet letter F, DFA taught, is a combination of inner work and divine remembrance. When these align, the human being becomes like a fortress. No Jinn, no whisper, no internal turmoil can breach it. In the end, the message is clear. Protection begins not with fear, but with insight. Reflect on your own heart. Attend to your wounds, correct your arrogance, and anchor yourself in Allah's guidance. The real victory is not merely survival, but transformation to turn vulnerability into strength and weakness into spiritual resilience. When we reach the question of why Jinn possess humans, we must step back and look at the broader picture of divine wisdom. Nothing happens in the universe without purpose, and that includes spiritual trials. Possession, frightening as it may appear, is often a test, a reminder, a wake-up call from Allah. It is an opportunity for the soul to recognize its weakness, to seek protection, and to return to its Creator with humility and sincerity. The reality is that these experiences are not meant merely to terrify, they are meant to teach, to purify, and to redirect. The Quran repeatedly reminds us that life is a series of tests. Allah says, "Do people think that they will be left alone because they say, 'We believe and will not be tested'?" 29:2. Every challenge, whether illness, loss, or spiritual disturbance, is designed to illuminate the state of the human heart. Jinn possession, in particular, confronts a person with the fragility of the unseen world and the necessity of constant reliance on Allah. It is a mirror that reflects negligence, a call to re-establish the practices and disciplines we may have abandoned, and an invitation to recenter our lives around remembrance, prayer, and ethical conduct. In many cases, the very experience of feeling possessed can catalyze a spiritual awakening. A person who had neglected prayer may find themselves suddenly drawn back to the Quran. Someone consumed by worldly distractions may become more mindful of Allah's presence in their daily life. This is a profound demonstration of divine wisdom. What initially appears as harm can become a source of immense spiritual growth. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that trials are not punishment but purification. When the heart turns to Allah in these moments, it is strengthened in ways that comfort and ease alone could never achieve. We also see that divine wisdom often works through limitations. Humans are not immune to the influences of the unseen, but Allah places boundaries around them. A believer's heart, when filled with sincerity and remembrance, becomes a sanctuary that no jinn can penetrate. This illustrates a deeper spiritual principle. Protection comes not from avoiding trials, but from cultivating inner resilience. When the heart is alive with dhikr, guided by ethical conduct and anchored in humility, external forces, whether seen or unseen, lose their power. The real victory is not merely the removal of the jinn, it is the strengthening of the human spirit. This perspective also reshapes our understanding of fear. Instead of fearing jinn, we learn to fear Allah alone, and in that fear there is security. Fear of Allah is not terror, it is conscious awareness, respect, and mindfulness that shapes every choice. The Quran tells us, indeed, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. 49:13. When the heart seeks righteousness, it naturally becomes a place that no malevolent force can dominate. Possession, then, is not the ultimate threat. Distance from Allah is. The jinn can only affect those who have left a gap between themselves and their Lord. Ultimately, the wisdom of Allah is that every difficulty, including the fear of unseen forces, can lead to return to restoration of faith, discipline, and humility. What appears as affliction is often a divine nudge, guiding the believer towards spiritual awakening. The believer learns that reliance on Allah, sincere prayer, and remembrance are not mere rituals. They are shields, fortresses, and sources of clarity. And the most profound lesson is that no force, whether seen or unseen, can overpower the one whose heart is fully surrendered to Allah. So as we reflect on why jinn possess humans, we must remember this. The test is not random, and the solution is always within reach. Every challenge points to our dependence on Allah, and every trial is an opportunity to strengthen our faith. When the heart turns back to its Creator, the soul is fortified, the unseen loses its grip, and the believer emerges not only protected but transformed. The ultimate victory lies not in the absence of trials, but in the depth of our return to Allah, for in that return we discover a power greater than any influence, the power of a heart anchored in divine light.